The night was heavy with summer heat, the kind that clung to the skin and made the air feel alive. But it was the sound that woke Clara Holt, a low, rolling rumble like distant thunder. She blinked in the darkness of her small bedroom, the hum of the ceiling fan cutting through the silence, and then the sound came again, deeper, sharper, wrong. She pushed herself up, bare feet meeting the cool wood floor, and peered through her window just as the sky split open. A jagged tear of white fire ripped across the heavens, swallowing the stars, and then shapes impossibly vast, angular Ilion slid through the breach like shadows on water. The world outside was still, eerily still, as if every living thing was holding its breath, and then, as if on cue, the dogs began to howl. They howled from every porch, every yard, every lonely stretch of road in their rural Midwestern town. Clara's chest tightened. She should have run, should have hidden, but she couldn't move. Couldn't stop staring as beams of pale light speared down from the ships, sweeping over rooftops and streets with terrifying precision. When the first scream broke the silence, high, thin cry that ended abruptly, Clara flinched. The beams weren't just light. They were taking people, children. One moment they were there, the next, they were rising helplessly into the air. Limbs, flailing, voices shredding in terror. And then the beam was in her room. It was cold, colder than ice, colder than anything she had ever felt, and it wrapped around her like invisible hands. She tried to scream, but her voice caught in her throat as her body lifted off the floor, pajama hems fluttering against her bare ankles. Below her, the bedroom fell away, the hallway, the front door. Her father's voice pierced the night. Clara. Daniel Holt was in the street, barefoot, hair wild, sprinting after her as if he could outrun the impossible. His eyes locked on hers for one terrible instant, wide, desperate, tanned. Then the light swallowed her, severing his voice mid-shout. She was rising faster now, into the gaping dark underbelly of the ship, her father shrinking beneath her, the world tilting, the air thinning. And then she was inside. The walls were metal, seamless, the air sharp with a chemical temps that made her nose sting. Around her, rows of children huddled against cold steel bulkheads, some crying openly, others too stunned to make a sound. The light had left her skin prickling and her heart pounding, but she wasn't alone. A boy no older than 9 was pressed into the corner, shivering so hard his teeth clicked. His eyes darted to hers when she knelt beside him. "Eli," he whispered, voice cracking. She didn't think, just wrapped an arm around him. "I've got you," she said, and the words came out more certain than she felt. "I'll protect you." It was a promise she didn't understand yet, but it settled in her bones like something unbreakable. The sound of heavy steps echoed down the corridor. The guards were unlike anything Clara had ever seen, tall, insectoid, their chitin gleaming under the harsh white lights, eyes like black glass, unreadable. They moved with mechanical precision, herding the children into lines, separating them with brutal efficiency. When one of the guards reached for Eli, Clara tightened her grip, planting herself between them. The guard's clawed hand caught her shoulder and tore them apart as if she were made of paper. She fought, kicked, but the grip was iron. Eli's cry cut through her like a blade. The guard pressed something cold and burning against her wrist, and she gasped as a glowing mark seared into her skin, a prisoner's brand, the numbers pulsing faintly under the surface. Without a word, the guard shoved her into a narrow cell, the door ceiling shut with a hiss. The only view was a thin slit near the ceiling. Clara scrambled to it, chest heaving, and through that narrow strip of glass she saw her home, her planet, shrinking against the endless black. Her fingers curled into fists, the burn on her wrist throbbing in time with her pulse. She pressed her forehead to the cold metal and whispered, so quietly only she could hear, "I'm coming back." 7 years had burned away the last traces of the barefoot girl who once stared at the stars from a small-town bedroom. Clara Holt was now 20. Her frame lean from hunger and labor, Her skin a map of scars carved by Varix-9's cruel winds and the alien whips of its wardens. Her eyes sharpened into something that could cut. The prison colony was nothing but red rock and rusted steel. A barren wasteland where acid storms swept in without warning, flaying exposed skin and corroding metal in minutes, and the air always tasted faintly of ash. She moved through it with the practiced wariness of someone who knew every shadow could hide an enemy. The colony's mining pits yawned like wounds in the earth, swallowing thousands of prisoners each day to hack rare minerals from the rock. Minerals destined for alien war machines that Clara would never see, but had learned to hate with every breath. Survival here wasn't just about strength. It was about alliances, favors, and debts paid in food, scraps of cloth, or moments of protection. And for humans, the lowest caste among the dozens of species crammed into Varix-9 survival, was an act of defiance in itself. The alien guards, still insectoid and unreadable, patrolled with electro whips that could drop a person screaming in the dirt, and Clara had learned long ago that standing out was a death sentence unless you could back it up. So she did. Over the years she had built a covert network of human prisoners who smuggled stolen tools, traded contraband for rations, and trained in secret corners of the mines where the cameras didn't quite reach. Eli Moreno, now 17, was her shadow, fierce and restless, always pushing too hard, too fast, like a spark dancing too close to dry powder. To him, Clara was more than a leader. She was the sister he'd chosen, the one who'd kept her promise when the world had given him nothing else. Then there was Mara Jin, an ex-gang leader from Earth, whose survival instincts were as sharp as broken glass. She respected Clara's skill, but never her moral restraint, always asking why they didn't go further, why mercy still had a place here. Clara never answered outright, but the truth was hidden beneath her thin mattress in a battered notebook, its pages filled with crude sketches of trees, rivers, the face of her father as she remembered it, and, scrawled again and again, until the ink bit into the paper, "We will go home." It wasn't hope. Hope was a luxury. Long dead, it was a promise, forged in the cold of an alien cell, branded into her as surely as the mark on her wrist. Every ration stolen, every guard outwitted, every ally kept alive was a step toward that promise, even if no one else believed it could be kept. The storm came in like a living thing, a wall of crimson dust and acid rain tearing across Varix-9's horizon, lightning splitting the sky in jagged green veins, the air thick with the hiss of burning metal as droplets pitted the colony's walls. In the chaos, alarms blared and visibility dropped to almost nothing. And that was when an older prisoner, Jarek, a man whose body was more bone than flesh, lunged at a guard and ripped the electro staff from its claws. For a heartbeat, he looked almost free, a shadow against the screaming wind as he sprinted toward the perimeter. He never made it. A single bolt from the watchtower cut him down mid-stride, his body crumpling in the red dirt, steam curling from the wound. The guards dragged him away without a word, the storm swallowing the scene, but Clara's eyes had already locked onto something else, a brief, flickering distortion in the shimmering blue of the force field fence, a gap no wider than a doorway. There and gone again, as the storm's static crackled against it. Her pulse kicked hard, the image burning itself into her mind. Later that day, when the skies cleared and the air stank of scorched dust, a transport ship descended into the yard, its belly opening to spill out a fresh line of human captives, wrists bound, heads down. Among them was a girl no older than 12, her hair tangled, her eyes wide and glassy with Shockley Carson, though Clara wouldn't hear the name until later. She froze when she saw her, because the girl looked like a ghost from another life. Like Clara had stepped outside herself and was staring at the barefoot child. She'd been the night the sky had torn open over Earth. Something twisted in her chest, sharp and unwelcome. Because she'd buried that part of herself long ago, under layers of steel and scars. But the sight of Leah's trembling hands cracked it open again. That night, deep in the mines, a different kind of whisper found Huron, alien engineer, skin gray and cracked with age, leaning against the tunnel wall, his breathing wet and shallow. His voice was a rasp, barely audible over the hum of the drills, but the words punched straight through her exhaustion. A human ship, operating in the outer systems, one that didn't fly for any government or alien master. A renegade vessel, crewed by humans, hitting prison convoys and vanishing into the dark. They called it the Sparrow. Clara didn't know if he was delirious or telling the truth, but the idea lodged itself in her mind, dangerous and bright. She lay awake for hours on her thin cot, staring at the ceiling while the storm outside whispered against the walls. There was only one way to reach the Sparrow, only one way to even test if the rumor was real: break out. And if she tried, she would be gambling not just her life but Leah's, maybe the entire fragile network she'd built. The thought should have been unbearable. Instead, it felt like oxygen after years of breathing poison. The days that followed were a blur of stolen hours and whispered drills. The four of them moving like ghosts through the shadows of the mines and barracks, memorizing routes, signals, and the delicate choreography that would carry them to freedom. The plan was reckless, maybe suicidal, disguised themselves in stolen alien labor gear, wait for a sandstorm to drop visibility to nothing, then slip aboard a supply skiff before it launched for the outer checkpoint spot on Varex 9. Reckless was the only thing that ever worked. Eli threw himself into the training with a restless energy that bordered on dangerous, quick to learn but quicker to improvise, while Leah, small and quiet, absorbed every detail like a sponge, her wide eyes masking a stubborn resolve. Mara, though, was a different story, sharp, skilled, and dangerous in her own right. But too used to playing for herself, too used to reading every plan as a gamble where the odds could be tipped for a price. Clara saw the shift before anyone else, the way Mara lingered near the Overseer's patrols, the almost casual questions about timing and routes, but she had too much to juggle to confront it outright. It was Leah who broke her focus entirely, one night in the dim corner of the barracks, her voice barely above a whisper, as she told Clara she'd overheard guards talking about a human man, Daniel Holt, alive and working in a different colony, far from Varex 9. The name hit her like a blow to the ribs, knocking the air from her lungs. She'd told herself for years he was dead, because the alternative was unbearable. Now the mission wasn't just about getting outed, was about finding him, no matter where that trail led. The night before the escape, the storm they'd been waiting for began to brew, a distant roar rolling over the horizon, the air turning electric with the taste of dust and acid. Clara lay awake, going over every step in her head, until a shadow moved at the far end of the barracks, Mara, slipping out into the dark. Clara followed, silent, her heartbeat a drum in her ears, until she saw it, Mara, walking toward the skeletal silhouette of an alien overseer waiting in the stormlight. The fight was sudden, brutal, and without witnesses, a flurry of fists, kicks, and muffled grunts swallowed by the rising wind. Clara was faster, more disciplined, but Mara fought like a cornered animal, her nails raking, her teeth flashing in the dim. In the end, Clara had her pinned, one hand at her throat, the other raised for the killing strike hand. Then she hesitated. Killing her would make them no better than the ones who ruled this place. So she let her go, spitting a warning in Mara's ear before shoving her into the dirt. It wasn't mercy, it was a choice. But as she walked away, the storm curling tighter around the camp, Clara knew in her bones it was a choice she would pay for. The storm came down like the wrath of a dying world. Walls of red sand swallowing the colony in choking darkness, lightning flaring green across the sky as alarms wailed over the roar. Wrapped in stolen alien labor gear, Clara, Eli, Leah, and a silent, watchful Mara moved through the chaos like shadows, slipping past distracted guards and half-blind sentries toward the skiff bay. Every step was a gamble, every breath a countdown. But when the bay doors loomed ahead, whipping sand clawing at their skin, Clara almost let herself believe they might make it. Then the air split with the harsh cry of alien orders, and soldiers poured in from every angle, rifles spitting arcs of plasma that lit the storm like a battlefield. Mara's voice cut through it all, shouting in the alien tongue, her face twisted. In something between triumph and desperation, betrayal, complete and unapologetic. Clara barely had time to shove Leah behind cover before a bolt of plasma tore toward her. Eli moved faster, his body slamming into hers, knocking her to the ground as the shot burned straight through him. His breath hitched, a wet, shuddering gasp, and she caught him, her hands slick with his blood, the world narrowing to the weight of him in her arms. "You have to make it," he whispered, his voice breaking apart in the storm. "Promise me." She didn't remember answering, only lifting him with a strength born of fury and grief, carrying him onto the skiff as plasma fire scorched the walls. She slammed the hatch, hit the launch, and the skiff roared into the storm, tearing free of the ground in a whirl of dust and lightning. For a few breathless moments, she thought they were headed for open space. Freedom at last, but the skiff's engine shifted, the controls dead in her hands. Drawn by some unseen command, toward a looming shape above the clouds, an orbital station, black and silent against the stormlight. Docking clamps seized them, and before she could decide whether to fight or run, the hatch opened. A man stood there, human, his face weathered but unmistakably alive, his eyes sharp with recognition. "Clara Holt," he said, as if he'd been waiting years to speak her name. "I'm Captain Reeve. Welcome to the Sparrow." Behind him, the hangar stretched wide, lined with ships and bustling with human crews, more than she'd seen since the night she was taken. Not a ragtag band of survivors, but a fleet, hidden in plain sight, preparing for something far larger than an escape. The Sparrow was nothing like the ships that had stolen her from Earth. It was alive with human voices, the clang of tools, the scent of real food cooking somewhere beyond the hangars. Its corridors lined with scavenged tech and patched hull plates from a dozen alien designs. Everywhere Clara looked, there were faces marked by the same kind of past. She carried former child prisoners, grown into hardened fighters, their bodies lean, their eyes sharp, their movements carrying the quiet precision of people who had survived by learning to kill before they learned to live. The fleet was a ghost army built from the galaxy's forgotten children. Every ship in the hidden armada, a retrofitted alien craft now bristling with human ingenuity and stolen weapons. Leah walked close to her side, still wide-eyed, but already watching, already learning, and Clara saw in her the same steel she'd once tried to bury in herself, in the command deck. Captain Reeve laid it out with the blunt force of someone who didn't waste words. They had been preparing for a massive strike to shatter the prison network in this sector, to free every human still rotting in alien chains. Varex-9 was there, linchpin. Its mineral output fueled half the war machines in the region, and its destruction would break the enemy's spine. But to take it, they needed someone who knew it down to the last blind corner and hidden camera. Someone who could turn its prisoners into soldiers in a single night. "That's you," Reeve said, his gaze steady. "No one else can do it." The offer sat in her chest like a weight. She could walk away, now disappear into some quiet corner of the galaxy with Leah, maybe even search for her father without looking back. For the first time since she was 13, she had a choice. But when she closed her eyes, she saw Eli's blood on her hands, heard his voice in the storm. "You have to make it." She understood now. He hadn't meant just escape. He'd meant all of them. When she opened her eyes again, her voice was steady, stripped of hesitation. "We go back," she said, "and we burn it down." Around her, the hum of the ship seemed to shift, as if the Sparrow itself reproved. She wasn't just a prisoner anymore. She was a commander, and the war to bring her people home had just begun. The battle for Verexnine erupted in fire and steel, the void around the prison world tearing open as the Sparrow's fleet dropped from hyperspace in perfect formation. Retrofitted alien warships screaming into the fight with human ferocity. Clara was at the front, her voice cutting through comes as she led the ground assault. Dropships knifing through the atmosphere under the cover of heavy bombardment. The red wastes shook with the force of orbital strikes, sand and acid rain boiling under the heat of plasma fire. Her boots hit the ground running, rifle steady, every step a march toward the Overseer's tower. Around her, human prisoners, some half-starved, some barely able to stand, took up stolen weapons and fought like they had nothing left to lose. The alien guards fell back, their whips useless against the storm of vengeance sweeping through. The colony, Clara's squad breached the tower in a blaze of gunfire and smoke, the alien Overseer's kitten cracking under the blow of her blade, its final shriek swallowed by the roar of the freed. In the chaos of the holding cells, she found him, Daniel Holt, thinner, older, his eyes disbelieving until they locked on hers. He whispered her name like a prayer, and she pulled him into her arms, the years between them collapsing into a single heartbeat. Hours later, the fleet rose from the surface, carrying not prisoners, but soldiers, and Verexnine burned in their wake. Back on Earth, Clara stood in her old bedroom, the window still opening onto the same stretch of quiet sky, the air heavy with the scent of home. Leah stood in the doorway, asking softly if she was staying. Clara's gaze lingered on the stars, her hand resting on the windowsill. "Not yet," she said, her voice steady. "There are still others out there." And then she was boarding the Sparrow again, the hum of its engines wrapping around her like an old heartbeat. In her hand she carried Eli's old prisoner ID, tag worn and cold from years of hiding. She hung it on the console, the metal catching the light as the stars stretched ahead, a silent vow that the fight wasn't over, and never would be, until every last one of them was free.